Hello, everyone. Professor Philip Travis, and this is our announcement for American History Part 2. This week, we are going to be examining a period of time in American history known as the Gilded Age. This is the period associated with the height of the Industrial Revolution in the United States. The term Gilded Age is sometimes attached to Mark Twain. The idea behind the term meaning that, of course, something that's gilded is something that is covered in silver or gold-plated. The idea being that something looks fantastic and shiny and impressive on the outside, but when you get deeper, you find other realities that that the shiny outside surface might not convey. And that's kind of what we're really going to be thinking about this week. We're going to be engaging, we're going to be looking at some primary sources this week, and particularly with those primary sources, we're going to be engaging the issue of wealth, power, and inequality in the United States during this time period. And this is really relates to the images you see here. This image up here is one of the mansions of Commodore Vanderbilt. Who was Commodore Vanderbilt? Commodore Vanderbilt was the railroad monopolist who tremendous power during the Gilded Age in the United States, as did the railroads in general. Commodore Vanderbilt, of course, ultimately gave a great deal of money to a university in Nashville that ultimately would name itself Vanderbilt University. But the wealth of these monopolists, like Commodore Vanderbilt, or John D. Rockefeller and Standard Oil, or Andrew Carnegie with U.S. Steel, or J.P. Morgan, the most powerful banker in the country, the amount of wealth they amassed was profound. It was absolutely massive. And during the Gilded Age, it would not be unrealistic, or it would not be far off from reality to say that these monopolists actually, in many ways, had more power than their state and federal political leaders, the government of the United States at the time. In fact, the Pennsylvania Railroad, the primary lobbyist for the Pennsylvania Railroad, actually had their own office in the state capital in Pennsylvania, in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, speaking to the extent to which extreme power and wealth was entrenched in the organization and operation of government. The Gilded Age is a period of tremendous technological developments. Unprecedented amount of patents were made during this time period. This is the era of Thomas Edison and the electric light bulb. This is the era of Alexander Graham Bell and the telephone. This is the era in which steel really becomes a mass-produced product through what was known as the Bessemer process, which its development really predated the Gilded Age slightly, but the mass production of steel. This is the period when the transcontinental railroad lines were built. There were 4 transcontinental railroad lines that were built during the Gilded Age, meaning transcontinental across the entirety of the United States. Those 4 that I was mentioning were built with massive subsidies from the federal government. The subsidies came in huge land grants along the railroad corridors. There was a 5th transcontinental line completed towards the end of the Gilded Age as well. So this is a period of tremendous development. Electric lighting in cities, numerous examples of this that really transformed American life. And because of a lack of regulation, because of a lack of taxes, there's no income tax during this period of time. For much of the Gilded Age, there's no really meaningful anti-monopoly or antitrust. Trust and monopolies, we can kind of use these two terms together to mean the same thing. Monopoly, meaning that you control all aspects of a particular industry. But there are really no antitrust laws for much of the Gilded Age. And when they ultimately produced antitrust laws, like the Sherman antitrust law, they weren't really enforced until you emerge into the progressive era under the leadership of presidents like Theodore Roosevelt and, of course, numerous grassroots activist movements, which is what we will deal with and talk about next, of course, is the movement away from the Gilded Age to the Progressive era. On the other side of all of that wealth and that power produced during this time period, there was also tremendous inequality in the United States. These two images are just a couple of images you're looking at that we're going to be looking at this week. We're going to be looking at other images from this era. But these are images from New York City tenement houses. And these were taken by the photographer and muckraking journalist during this period of time. To be a muckraker, that was kind of like a term that was sometimes used to refer to those that sort of were investigative journalists that were doing journalism in ways that hoped that it could show to the American people sort of things that are not widely understood or known if you are not living in these areas. And so in places like New York City, there's tremendous poverty. I'll show you some statistics this week of poverty rates and homelessness in cities like New York during this period. This is an example of outside of a tenement house in New York City, and this is another look at one of the dilapidated and almost falling down tenement houses that many people, the slums that many people, thousands and thousands of people had to live in day to day. These conditions of these slum tenement houses was appalling. They were associated with the outbreak of disease because they often lacked any kind of meaningful ventilation. They burned down a lot. The sanitary conditions inside of them were horrifying. In many cases, you would have one toilet for an entire floor that would, of course, be shared by all of the individuals on that floor of the tenement house. There was very poor ventilation, and the rooms were packed and overcrowded with as many individuals as you could. So there's massive poverty. There's nothing during this time period. There's no income tax, so there's nothing really regulating extreme wealth. There's likewise nothing really protecting you if you are an immigrant worker in one of these areas. There's no minimum wage law. There's no right to unionize. In fact, your attempts to unionize as a worker could be met with both government and private force, military force in some cases. And there were all kinds of ways that corporations went about basically trying to prevent workers from organizing. So you have no right to form a union. There's no minimum wage laws. If you're an unskilled worker, you're working in very dangerous, difficult conditions. There's no workman's comp. There's no unemployment insurance, let alone health care. And if you were injured on the job, you can't work anymore. That's that. And many times that meant an absolute destitute scenario for the worker and likewise for their family. So the Gilded Age. And this is what we're really going to be engaging this week, is that conversation about wealth and power and extreme inequality in the United States. There's particularly two primary sources that I really want us to focus on for this week. And these are between two authors that engage in that debate about wealth and inequality. One of them is the social Darwinist William Graham Sumner. And I'm not going to tell you what these argue. I want to see you break apart these documents this week in the discussion forum. The other was an author named Henry George, who wrote Progress and Poverty. So this week, if we are starting the extra credit this week, I offer extra credit with some of these announcements, not all of them. Sometimes they're actually graded announcements. But this week, what I want you to do, you'll see an extra credit discussion board in your content modules area. And all I want you to do is just write a general summary of some of the things that you thought were most important from this announcement. Write it in the extra credit discussion board, and this will be a bonus point. And at the end of the term, I add your bonus points up, and I add them to a test score. And it can really help your final grade in the class by maybe 2 or 3 grade points. And it's also a fun way to engage and get us starting to think about our subject for this week. If you have any questions, please email me. Use your college email, your student email, to email me at likewise my email account. That's the best way to communicate with me. Let me know if you have any questions. And I'll see everyone this week in the discussion board.